The purest form of monarchy is despotism, the unencumbered rule of an individual, free from any interference by Parliament, Church, or any other body. Few monarchs ever achieve this, though many aspire to it.
For a century and a half, Henry and his successors had exploited the religious authority conferred by the supremacy to try to make royal power effectively unlimited by Parliament or anybody else.
From within his own government, as James was plunged into a crisis almost entirely of his own making. James II was England's first Catholic monarch for over 150 years. Ever since the Reformation, Englishmen had been taught to hate and fear Catholicism as foreign, ungodly, and above all, un-English. How, in view of these deep-seated fears, could a Catholic monarch be head of the Protestant Church of England? In Parliament, the ruling Tories were anxious to be reassured. They had supported James's right to become king.
Now, in return, they naturally expected that James, Catholic though he was, would be equally unwavering in his support for the Church of England. And, at first,
James's mission, then, was to convert the country back to Catholicism. But what method would he use? Would it be persuasion or coercion? Here memories mattered. The Catholic Queen, Bloody Mary, had used the rack and the stake, and thanks to Fox's Book of Martyrs, the memory was still fresh in England. So too was the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, the slaughter of Protestants which had occurred during the French Wars of Religion.
The kings of England are sovereign princes. The laws of England are the king's laws. It is an inseparable prerogative of the kings of England to dispense with penal laws upon particular necessary reasons, and of those reasons the king himself is sole judge.
this ruling turned Parliament into a mere sleeping partner in the Constitution. It might pass whatever laws it liked. Whether and on whom they were enforced was entirely up to the king. But his attention next. His victory in the courts had given him the power to overturn anti-Catholic legislation on a case-by-case basis. But his ultimate goal was to get the power to nullify all the laws which Parliament had made against Catholics. The Church of England, with its wealth, its power, its churches in every town and village, was the great obstacle to this. It had turned the constitutional question of James's power into a public issue. At the trial, in the huge spaces of Westminster Hall, passions about the legality of the dispensing power itself rose to such an extent that decorum broke down. The spectators cheered counsel for the bishops and booed and hissed the royal lawyers. The jurors stayed out all night in continuous deliberation. Then, the following morning, they returned the verdict of not guilty. Instead, it was James's government that had been condemned. His bid to become an absolute monarch in the mould of his cousin Louis, or even his predecessor Henry VIII, had failed. no English monarch would ever dare make the attempt to gain. James's eagerness to legitimise Catholicism in England had brought him into open conflict with Parliament, the bishops, and now the courts. He came off worse in all these conflicts, but even so, he might have survived. It was as it almost immediately became known, was to transform the monarchy. But first, William's status had to be decided. In his propaganda, William had promised to do nothing without Parliament, and an assembly of both Lords and Commons was now summoned. Tory peers wanted to make William regent, to act as caretaker, whilst the Stuart dynasty skipped a generation to his wife Mary. But William made it clear that he would be king or he would return to the Netherlands. Nobody wanted that. So, in the end, Lords and Commons agreed to a face-saving compromise. William and Mary would be joint king and queen, a sort of double monarchy, unique in the history of England, although the exercise of sovereignty would be vested solely in William. At a ceremony at the banqueting house in Whitehall, William and Mary were formally offered the crown.
Mary, who'd only arrived in the country the day before, joined her husband on twin thrones under the cloth of Este. Then, the House of Lords on the right and the Commons on the left, led by their respective speakers, advanced towards the steps of the throne. The clerk read out the Bill of Rights, and a nobleman offered William and Mary the crown in the name of the Convention as the representative of the English nation. William accepted on their joint behalves, and they were proclaimed King and Queen of England to the sound of trumpets.